Good morning, everybody. I'm just switching on just to let everybody get into the chat room. I hope everybody's well this morning, and I hope you had a lovely weekend. I don't know about you guys, we have very mixed weather here. We seem to go from sort of quite lovely sunshine last week to howling gales. I do hope you had something a little bit better where you were. If you've got a moment and you're settled comfortably and you're ready, feel free to just write me a quick line about what you did this weekend. So pop, if those of anybody who's new to the sessions, there is a questions bar over in the control panel, and you can type in your comments and questions there. So perhaps just drop me a line. What did you get up to at the weekend? Did anybody do anything exciting? As much as you can under lockdown, of course. Just while we wait for everybody to join, I'm just going to give it a few minutes to let everybody jump on. You're all very quiet this morning. Did nobody do anything this weekend? Did you all just sit there? Did anybody binge watch a series? Oh, hang on, what's Simon saying? Went for a woodland walk on Saturday, and on Sunday you worked in the garden. Excellent, Simon. I don't think you'd have been able to work in the garden here. It was too flipping windy. It's horrendous. Beth said she sunbathed in the garden. Lovely, that's very nice. Again, I think you'd have been struggling down in Berkshire to be sunbathing. You may notice I'm sitting in a t-shirt today, but I'm feeling that a little, perhaps an extra layer might not be a bad idea later on. 21 degrees, Beth, my goodness, I need to be up in Lancashire. I'm in the wrong place. I should say I am actually a northern girl by heart. I grew up in Yorkshire originally. Lovely. So I'm just letting everybody jump on, just giving everybody a couple of minutes. It's just after I can see the number of attendees suddenly going up and up. I know it's Monday morning, isn't it? Takes us a moment to get going. Lovely. Okay, super. So it's just after 10 o'clock, so we'll get started. And a very, very warm welcome to everybody on this Monday morning. Today's topic, we're looking at teaching grammar. For those of you who are new to the sessions, my name's Anna. I've been a teacher and a teacher trainer for many, many years, too many years to remember. For those of you who've been on the sessions before, welcome back. It's lovely to see you again. So my sort of first question to you before we look at the outcomes for today is a little question. So when I say grammar, what do you think? What goes through your mind when I say the word grammar? Okay, and I'm not sharing my screen, which is not very helpful, is it? There we go. Hopefully you can all see that now. Thank you, Beth, for pointing that out. Sentence structure, says Andrea. Stress, says Monty. As in you get stressed. I totally agree with you. Verbs, vocabulary, says Andrea. I'm staying with Monty's stress. I think a lot of people, when you say the word grammar, people go, oh my goodness, complicated, stressful, absolutely. And I think, you know, in some cases, you know, the students perhaps feel that too, but certainly the teachers. So the things I would like to do today, our outcomes for today, we've got 3 key outcomes. So I want to take the fear out of teaching grammar, first of all. That's my main aim today. In order to do that, I am going to show you how we can use the PPP structure to teach grammar. So you remember last week we started to look at the presentation, practice and production structure to teach vocabulary. You can use exactly the same structure to teach grammar. That's the good news. And as always, clarify any questions that anybody does have. So as I said, if anybody is new, to the sessions, you'll see over in the one side, you've got a control panel where there is a questions section. So you can type in your questions or comments as we're going through. I do apologise, it does take me a moment to look at that and present, so just bear with me and I'll certainly give space at the end to ask questions. So Simon also says, a set of universal principles informing the formation of a language to ensure the effective communication of meaning, but also stress. Yes, absolutely. I like that, Simon. That's a lovely definition. Yeah, I think a lot of people do feel quite tense when they're looking at grammar. So I want to sort of take a little bit of stress out of that. So I want to start off today with a very, very practical example. So this is the way we're going to. So I want you to imagine, and you will need to imagine, that you are a 16-year-old EFL student. I don't mind where you feel you're from in the world, it doesn't really matter. And I want you to imagine that we're in a classroom setting, and in groups, what I normally do is I put my students into groups of about 4 people, and I give them a little topic to discuss. And the topic is very simple. I want you to discuss the school rules, so the school that you attend at the moment, and I want you to discuss the rules that you think are good and the rules that you think are bad, okay? As you can probably imagine, when I give this topic to discuss to 16-year-olds, most of the groups focus on the bad, not the good, but that's fine. It doesn't really matter. However, for the purposes of this online webinar, I want you to type your answers in. So if you're not at school at the moment, maybe you're past 16 and maybe you've finished school and maybe you're in the world of work, think back to when you were at school. Were there any rules that you thought were good, or any rules that you thought were a bit strange or a bit of a waste of time or you didn't agree with? As you're typing that in, I should say that at this point I always tell my students that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So I never discuss this with their teachers outside. This is something that is confidential in my classroom and they're free to discuss it openly. I'm never going to feed back to their school. Oh, Simon, that's a good one. Your tie always had to be a certain length. That's right. So Andrew said she didn't like getting up early. Yes, I don't think that's necessarily a school rule. What was the school rule? What time did you have to be at school? Oh, Safia, that's a good one. Wearing a blazer. Yes, I had to wear a blazer, but it was hot outside. Yes, that's not pleasant, is it? Oh, the top button, says Monty. Yes, your top button must be done up. Yes, that's a goodie. I like that. Oh, so you had to be at school at 8 o'clock, Andrea. That's very early, isn't it? Oh, Maisie, that's a good one. Having to tie your hair up all the time. I never had long enough hair, so that wasn't mine. Oh, Andrea, you didn't have to wear a uniform. I think that's quite stressful, actually. Oh, 5 minutes to get to class in between classes, says Ewan. Yes, that's tricky, isn't it? So you have to get to your next class with 5 minutes. Sometimes you feel like you're rushing. I don't know about you, but I used to hate swimming in PE because you never had enough time to have a shower, get dry and dressed and get to your next class, and you always felt like you had wet hair. Not pleasant. Oh, Zafia, that's a good one. So when you get to sixth form, you don't have to wear a uniform. That's nice. Yes, that's right. Good. Okay, right. Well, for those of you who are familiar with Blue Peter, this is a very British cultural reference. Here are some I prepared earlier. Okay, so these are genuine examples from students that that I have taught over the last couple of years. So all students must wear school uniform. Yes. Now, Andrea, this is very typical in the UK, as you probably know. You can't colour your hair. All students have to study geography. Year 12s don't have to stay in school if they have a free lesson. You can wear one set of earrings, so you can only have one piercing, you're not allowed two. Students mustn't be rude to their teachers. To be fair, I think this is quite a good one. Okay. Now then, this is where we would stop at the what we call the presentation stage. And you'll remember from last week that TL is the target language. So this is the language that I want my students to understand and hopefully be able to use by the end of my class. And the MPF was our meaning, pronunciation and form. So the meaning of the grammar in this particular case, how we pronounce it and how we write it. Now you'll notice that I've highlighted the key grammar in red. So I want you to just take a moment and have a look at that. And I want you to make any comments in the question box about the meaning, the pronunciation or the form. I don't mind which. And if you don't have any comments because you really don't know what I'm talking about yet, that's fine. Don't panic, just stay with me, all will become clear. So any comments? They're the modal verbs, Andrea. They're what we call modal auxiliary verbs. And modal verbs, these are the modals. So the must, can, have to, can, mustn't. Okay, those are our modals. And all they do is they help the main verb. So there's my main verb, wear, colour, study, stay, wear, be. Okay, those are my main verbs. So the modal just helps. The modal auxiliary verb, the clue is in the name. The auxiliary just means it helps the main bit. So it conveys extra meaning. Good. They are negative, can't, and positive can. Yes, you've got the infinitive afterwards. Yes. Okay. Any other comments or thoughts about that? If you're at home listening in, just say them out loud. Anything that you notice? Anything about the way we write them, perhaps? Yes, different ways to address permission. Absolutely, Simona. They're what we call modals of obligation in this particular case. We have many different ways of using modals in English, and these are modals of obligation. Absolutely. Yes, we've got the short forms in there, so can't, don't, mustn't. Absolutely. We've got the what we call the contracted forms, which we use a lot in English, don't we? You often emphasise the modal verb in speech, says Safia. Yes, particularly if you're a teacher, you must wear school uniform. You can't colour your hair. You can imagine your head teacher, can't you, saying that. Okay, so first of all, you'll notice that the target language, I know what my target language is going to be today. I'm doing modals of obligation, but you'll notice that the language actually comes out from the students. It's not me that's given them the sentences. These are all sentences that students have given me as the teacher. All I do when I hear them is I just put them on the board using the modals that I want them to focus on. Now, the reason for doing this is because if the language comes out from the students, they're going to be much more interested in concentrating on the lesson because it's relevant to them. They're the ones who've given me the rules, and you'll generally find that all of the rules on the board are the ones that they don't like. Okay, that's fine, absolutely fine. But because it's come from them, there's more buy-in from your students. They're going to concentrate rather than if you've just given them a list of modal verbs. Okay, so finding a context that is relevant to your students is really, really important. Now, with this one, we focused on school rules, which is obviously relevant while you've got students who are in schools. But if you wanted to do modals of obligation for adults, what sort of context could you use, do you think? Type your answers in. What context might you use for an adult? The workplace, Safia, absolutely. Work and taxes, says Simon, absolutely, yes. So you can use workplace rules, you can use tax rules if you're talking to a professional group, so maybe you're teaching a group of people in a company, that would be very relevant. Simon, absolutely. You can use cultural rules. So if you think about the UK, when you go into a shop, you have to talk about the weather. We love talking about the weather in this country. So think about sort of country rules, cultural rules, workplace rules, perhaps legislation that's relevant to the workplace that they're working in. And obviously in this particular case, we've got school rules. Great, perfect. So just make sure that your context is relevant. We always say context is key. If the context is relevant, your students will be engaged. Lovely. So a little bit of thought about what we've just looked at. Now, I should say this is not exhaustive. What you do not do when you're teaching grammar is bombard your students with absolutely every single possibility of that meaning if there are many. You want to focus them in on something specific. Otherwise, your class will get chaotic, you'll get confused, and your students will be even more confused. Okay, so just focus in on something specific. So this is an example of what I might do with modals of obligation. So what I would think about is when we're having a look, you'll see, so if I just go back a slide, that we've got some sentences in the positive, so must wear, and some sentences in the negative, mustn't. Can't, negative, can, positive, have to, positive, don't have to, negative. Okay, so when we look at the meaning of those, if we look at the positive form, so when I've used the language in positive, it's quite interesting. So you must wear school uniform. 100% obligation, there's no choice. If you don't wear your uniform, there are consequences. Or as was it Monty, I think, said this morning, you must button your top button. Yes, otherwise you get told off. You can, okay, is choice. It's not an obligation. So if you have a free lesson, you can choose to stay at school or you can choose to leave. So you can go out if you have a free lesson in year 12. It's a choice, it's not obligation. Have to, 100% obligation. So you must wear school uniform, you have to wear school uniform. It's 100% obligation. Now then, what happens if we go into the negative? Mustn't, it's still 100% obligation. Okay, so you mustn't colour your hair. Okay, if you do, there are consequences. Now then, this is interesting. You can't is 100% obligation. You'll see that in the positive, it's a choice, but when we put it into the negative, it becomes obligation. Don't have to. We go from 100% obligation in the positive to a choice when it's in the negative. Okay, so can we start to see some of the areas that our students might need some help with? And you'll see that I just do that as a very simple table on the board, and it just highlights the difference and students get it like that. Very easy. Now then, if we think about pronunciation, now I could spend hours looking at pronunciation of these sentences. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to. I might focus in on just a couple of things just to help them. For example, okay, you can't colour your hair versus you can wear one set of earrings. If you look at the can't versus the can, you'll see that the pronunciation of my vowel changes. So you can't, R, you'll see my mouth change, R, can, okay? Can't, can. Now what's interesting is if you go to the United States, you'll find that the difference is very, very minimal. So you'll get you can't and you can. So the accent also tells us a little bit about where somebody's from, where they've learned their English from. But if you're teaching, students are going and you use British pronunciation, you'll need to highlight to your students that there is a difference. Okay, so the way we do the vowel is different in the negative and the positive. Similarly, you might look at something like all students have to. And if you put it into a sentence, all students have to study. And you'll find that the have turns to have. So we end up with an F sound, not a V sound. And you'll see that the to goes to t. So all students have to study, have to study. So students will need help with that because most students will look at that and think all students have to study geography. Now, when they speak like that, they sound a little bit robotic. So we need to help them with natural pronunciation. Okay. The word geography is quite interesting as well. We tend to, or depending on where you're from in the country, and you'll see I do this, geography, the E is actually silent, okay? But if I talk about geographical, I put the E back in, geographical, and the stress changes. Now, a little bit more work on pronunciation. We're going to do an introduction to phonology on Wednesday. Okay, so you might focus on a couple of things like that with the pronunciation. Now, the form is interesting as well. You'll see that, as a few of you mentioned, we're using the contracted form more naturally. But you'll see that in the full form, mustn't is actually 2 words, but can't is only 1 word. Why is that? I have no idea. Sometimes the English language is doesn't really have an answer. Don't have to, do not have to. So showing them what the extended form is and showing them what the contracted form is. Both are important. Obviously, we tend to use the contracted form more when we're speaking, more in informal situations, informal writing, semi-formal writing. But if we're writing very formally, we might want to put in the full form. Okay, you've all gone very quiet on me. I hope you're all still all right. So that's our meaning, our pronunciation, and our form, okay? And as I said, you might choose different things to focus on, that's fine, okay? But we want to do a little bit of work on each so that our students come away with a really clear understanding. So what do I then do in my practice session? So I've spent my time doing my presentation, so that's my target language presented. We've had a look at our meaning, our pronunciation and form. Now we need to give our students a chance to practice. This is what I do in my classrooms. So I'm sharing a very, very practical example that I use all the time. So I ask my students to imagine that they're the new head of their school. Something that they get into role very quickly. And I allow them to introduce one new school rule, and you'll see that I give them post-its. Okay, and they have to write their new school rule on a post-it, and they must keep it secret. This is an individual activity. They're not allowed to share it yet. I tell them to be creative. You know, stay legal, but be creative. And I give them about 5 minutes. And then what I do is I ask them to stand up with their post-it, and I ask them to do a little mingle. So I get them to walk around. They're not allowed to speak to anybody just yet, and quite often I'll put music on in the background, especially if I've got a large room. When I stop the music, they have to find the nearest pair, and they have to share their post-its, and then they have to decide to keep one and throw the other one away, or put it away, put it on a table or something, but they just have to keep one between them. And then what I ask them to do is I ask them to stay together with their partner, mingle again, I put the music back on, and when the music stops, they have to join with another pair and they have to repeat the process. Once I've got it down to about 3 or 4 post-its, depending on how many people I have in the room, I take the winning post-its and I put them on the wall, and I give them all a free choice. They're allowed to then break away from their partner, break away from the group. They go and have a look at all of the post-its, and they're allowed to choose which rule they want to keep. And the debrief here is always really funny. I've had all sorts of things from, you know, all students have to study politics. Funnily enough, this was when we were going through Brexit. Through to, you know, all students have to bring in a pet on Friday, to everybody has to wear purple on Thursdays. We've had all sorts of winning choices. But it's lovely because it's very controlled. You just have your one rule, you just repeat it, you're practicing it a lot. And as the teacher, I can go around as they're writing their school rules and just check that the language is correct. Now then, when I move to the production stage, you'll remember this is freer practice. So, you know, you can do lots of different things. So, for example, you've just decided on a new school rule. So it might be that you want to set up a parent-teacher governors meeting, because obviously the headmaster, the head teacher has to inform them of the new rule. You might be sending an email to the parents about the new rule, explaining why it's important, why you're implementing it. You might do a letter to the local newspaper. You might do an interview. So it might be that journalists come to the school and they want to interview the head. So you might divide the class in half and have half as the journalist, half as the head teacher. You might do a debate. Or you might prepare a speech for the school assembly. You can do lots and lots of different things here depending on what you want to do. All of those work really, really well. So there you can see the sort of the presentation, the practice and the production. Okay, so we go from very controlled practice through to much freer production. In terms of grammar activities, there are lots of things you can do. So mingles work really well. So as I was just saying, you know, you get them up and you mingle. And it might be that you have half a sentence and you've got to find the other half of the correct sentence. It might be that you have to find your opposite. You might have to find synonyms. So anything that involves students mingling is always really good fun. Auctions, grammar auctions are really good. So you basically pull out sort of incorrect language from people's homework. You put them on the board, you put them into teams, and in teams they have to work out, they have to correct the sentences. If you're feeling really mean, you can put a few correct sentences in there as well, and they have to work out which ones are correct and which ones aren't. And then they bid for the sentences that they want to correct. If they bid and correct it correctly, they get to keep the sentence and the money. Works a treat. You can do gap fills, which is quite a nice way just to do sort of controlled practice. Sentence jumbles are fantastic. So you can either get the sentence and cut them up and just put them in groups and they just have to work it out. Or I quite like to do it as a run. So I keep the envelopes and the teams have to run to me, collect the envelope, take it back, put it in the correct order, write it down, bring it back, and it just builds in a level of competition, energy, you know, that's really, really great fun. What I would say with sentence jumbles is that the younger and the lower the level of English, make sure that the sentences are relatively simple. One word per cut, and make sure you start with a capital letter and a full stop to give them a little bit of help. As they get older and the level gets higher, then you might want to make it a bit more complicated. Together with all of the activities we mentioned last week. So bingo works well, you know, word puzzles, anything like that really works well too. So add in anything from last week from the activities that we mentioned. Now, I wanted to do a little bit of quick myth busting as well. So my first sort of myth, English grammar is complicated. For those of you who speak other languages, you'll know that not really. There are rules. Our grammar is not nearly as complex as some other languages, and over the years we've simplified it. So we've got rid of a lot of quite complicated stuff. So if anybody has studied, for example, Spanish, you'll know that in Spanish they have the subjunctive. We pretty much got rid of that in English. We decided it was too complicated. Out it goes. We only have one version of you. So if I am talking to a plural group, it's you. If I'm talking to one person, it's you. If I'm being incredibly formal and I'm meeting a very important person, you. And if I'm meeting a friend, it's you. So it's really not that complicated. And where our complexity is in English is the phonology and the vocabulary. We have a huge vocabulary in English, and the problem is we borrow our words from all over the world. So if you think about things like tsunami, that didn't exist in the English language really until a few years ago, Japanese, as is karate, karaoke, all of those sorts of things. If you like chocolate, chocolate is actually one of the indigenous languages in Mexico. If you wear pajamas in bed, that's a Hindi word. That means soft cotton trousers. Bungalow, pundit, guru, all Hindi words. So it depends where our vocabulary comes from. Okay, so it is quite complex, and the phonology is more where our students need our help. English as a foreign language teachers know all the rules, is all I have to say on that. I shall let you all into a secret. After 25 years of teaching, I still check my grammar rules before I teach it. Okay, so I always do a quick revision just to make sure that I'm clear in my own mind. So do not think that because you've been teaching for 20-something years, you automatically have all of the answers. You don't, okay? So don't worry. There's a perfect way to teach grammar. Okay. So if you ask 10 of my friends how they would teach, for example, modals of obligation, you'd get 10 different answers, and they'll all be good. That's fine. Okay? Grammar is boring or stressful. Doesn't have to be. You can make it fun, you can make it interactive, you can make it personal, make sure the context is relevant, make sure it's competitive. I promise you that your students will get to the end of a lesson like we've just done and go, oh, are we finished already? Okay, you can make it really, really interesting. A couple of you are saying that you speak other languages and English grammar is the easiest. I totally agree with you. It's not that complicated. And this is what I get all the time. You have to know all the rules before you start teaching. No, Absolutely not. I'll let you all into another secret, and that is that when you get going, you are literally a few pages ahead of your students in terms of what the grammar is. So generally, as the grammar point comes up in your textbook, you're having a quick look on the internet, checking your course book, talking to other teachers and making sure you have it clear yourself. So don't worry, you don't need to know it all before you start, okay? So I hope that's clarified a few things for you. I hope that you can see that we can still use the PPP in terms of grammar teaching. Next session, which is on Wednesday, we're going to have a look at phonology. We're just going to do an introduction, and again, I want to try and take some of the mystery away from it and show you that it can be fun, simple, and a really good thing to integrate into your classrooms. And so, does anybody have any questions? Thank you, some nice comments there. Thank you, Andrew, you're most welcome. If you've got any questions, do feel free to pop them into the question box in your control session, in your control panel even. Oh, everybody calls you Olivia. I'm so sorry, darling. You came up on my screen as Andrew. Thank you, Simon. That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. We will talk next week as well when we talk about where you, how you sort of put together a lesson plan and where you get your activities from. There are lots of places where you can find the answer to grammar questions. Simona, yes. Adult classes, all of the things that I do there. So I do mingles, my grammar auctions I do with adults, they love it. I do little competitions, we do sort of word puzzles, all sorts of things I do with, yeah, so Chloe, with which sort of answers Simona's question as well. So teaching adults for teaching tenses, pictures, use visuals. So I will do things like today, and I'll, you know, maybe use a visual with perhaps somebody walking, and then I'll put yesterday, and I'll show them the past tense. So I walk, I walked. So use lots of visuals. You can use timelines as well. Timelines are really great. So you just put a timeline on the board, and you have now in the middle, and you have the future, and then you have the past. And you can just draw in walked and show it in the, if you've got today here in the past there, pop it in the past. If it's a continuous tense, you just draw a wiggly line to show that it's something that's been ongoing. So I am walking. I walked would just be a little X. Timelines, pictures, all of those sorts of things work really well. You can also do quite a lot of what we call guide discovery. So it might be that we show the visuals and then we give them a little worksheet and they just have to fill in the gap with the correct verb. And we've got the verbs in a little table underneath so that it's very, very scaffolded, okay, particularly at the beginning. What else do I do for tenses? I use myself as well. So for verbs and things in the continuous, walking, standing, sitting, waving, you know, so use yourself, use your students, use a timeline, use visuals. If anybody has access to Raymond Murphy's book, what's it called? English Grammar in Use, the intermediate one. Don't bother with the beginners, don't bother with the advanced. The intermediate one is really all you need. And it shows you how to use timelines, Chloe. So it actually gives you the timeline for most of the tenses. It's really helpful. Lovely. And Olivia says she hasn't received the recording for last Wednesday. Olivia, you might need to drop the officer a line. They are on the line at the moment, so I've just flagged that up. So Beth, Laura, if you're listening, Olivia says she hasn't received the recorded session. Great. Well, guys, thank you very much for joining me this morning. It was lovely to see you all online. I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. As I said, we're going to be having a look at phonology. So just an introduction to phonology on Wednesday. And I hope you have a lovely rest of the day and enjoy the sunshine. Thanks so much, guys. See you next time. Bye-bye.